Okay, I'm on a roll today. So we're going to continue on the opposition or the reasons to oppose or the reasons we oppose the Constitutional Convention. For example, Hawaii wants same-sex marriage and Obamacare. While will Idahoans accept them if Hawaii honors death panels or the NDAA as far as compromise? What protection do the states and the people have to prevent every state gaining at least one amendment that will benefit them while they've accepted a multitude of others to their detriment? One topic? Where are the guarantees? Balanced budget? If the system of self-government that requires the eternal vigilance of the people isn't a balanced budget amendment inherent in the very meaning of self-government and government's creation to protect the rights of the people, and isn't any failure to the balanced budget a subversion of our liberty, guilty of high treason? If it is, do we not have a process for treason, and why isn't it exercised? How can the states support a balanced budget amendment on one hand by spending countless hours looking for ways to file for federal grants to seek more money? Can you imagine? Oh yeah, you guys, the federal government's out of control. You spend way too much money, but by the way, can we have our increased federal funding for education or for lands? Really? Give me a break. How can the state governments expand in size and continue to spend money they don't have, misappropriating money and making people believe that the legislatures really think that the BBA will work, when in reality it's no different than any existing law or amendment? Not to mention that laws were never supposed to be included as amendments in the first place, as in the previous video I wrote, or I did. Will immigration and healthcare be part of the BBA? And what if leaving something out of the amendment that is a loophole to make it worse than it already is? Three-fourths must ratify, and they felt that's a safety mechanism? What's to prevent a convention from being a garage sale where each state comes with its junk tires and swaps for items in compromise to utilize monetary deception through subversion by special interest groups? Did anybody ever think about the fact that the BBA, in necessity, in order to balance the budget amendment, might include raising taxes? I mean, isn't that what the Tea Party's all against anyway? The BBA, will we abolish the Federal Reserve? I mean, they're in control of our fiat currency right now. And what about the 16th and 17th Amendment? Will those be included in the balanced budget amendment as well? It was stated that in Article 5 bypasses the federal government, and if all the states call for a convention, they must honor it. Is this like the states against Common Core, Obamacare, or the multitude of executive orders or SCOTUS cases reviewed as the supreme law of the land? What if Congress denies the petition of the states and calls for a convention? What enforcement mechanism is in place to call out an already out-of-control Congress? It goes on and on, guys. If the states have the authority to bypass Congress, they certainly have the authority to utilize nullification and use the 9th and 10th Amendments as a safer alternative. Who writes the convention rules? How the states and the people assured that the rule writers will not subvert the intent of the Constitution? I mean, we've got our own state legislatures that are volunteering to be the new founding fathers. Have you guys checked on their background? I know one of them is a neocon. Who will be chosen? The legislature? Don't we have problems with the legislatures now failing to adhere to the Constitution and listening to their constituents, avoiding the radio and having meetings in private, and silencing any ability for the people to be heard? Many of the legislators are attorneys. Aren't titles of nobility unconstitutional? Amendments. Oh, although these sound like great things that should be abolished, many never should have been implemented in the first place. When the topics of these amendments were chosen, did they think hard and deep enough to determine if it strikes to the root of the issue? I know for a fact that that's not true. Aren't amendments worthless if the states and the people have no way to enforce them? If amendments have a way to enforce them, so does the Constitution they swore an oath to. Within this BBA amendment, does this include the abolition of Federal Reserve, like I mentioned before? That was implemented specifically to manipulate our nation's currency, creating boom-bust cycles and forcing the nation to pay interest on fiat debt currency that isn't even real money? Will the amendments bring back the only legal tender of gold and silver? And if it doesn't, isn't the purpose of the convention short-sighted? And if we target a bill related to money without it? Does the amendment include the termination of fraudulent banker and crony capitalist mergers and cozy relationships? And does it reverse the moral decline and greed of a nation? Does the amendment include the research done by the 1933 bankruptcy or the ability for the government invested in CAFR funds? Yes, that is CAFR. And what about urban renewal and other taxing districts? Will this amendment abolish these districts and reduce 80% of the current size of government that have been created without the delegated authority that is necessary to a balanced budget? Have we truly identified that Congress is the root of what is bankrupting America? So isn't the states, the Federal Reserve, the United Nations, the multitude of expanding government agencies and misappropriation of funds, open borders also part of the problem? Term limits. This is a good one. Wasn't that passed in Idaho and somehow buried? Only 50% voted, so it really doesn't matter? What happened to elections? Do we want to kick out and punish the great legislators when our founders stated that term limits would be more harmful to our liberty than without them? Abolishing the tax code. Will this include the abolition of the IRS and the IRS as an undelegated authority? Will the federal government still have the authority to tax the people if an unconstitutional amendment was initiated by the Federal Reserve? Amendments 16 and 17 in the abolition of the tax code, striking at the root or the branch. The IRS and the tax code do not need an amendment to be abolished because not only are they an undelegated authority, there is no existing amendment in the Constitution giving the IRS power. So we would essentially be restricting the power that does not exist, which defies logic. Compel the Congress to follow the Constitution? Do we need to risk an amendments convention to compel them to do something we already have the power to do without one? Treason, in good behavior, and elections, and recalls were all viable options. Why an amendments process needed when the states can properly nullify any law they deem unconstitutional? This merely is either the state's ignorance or the fear in the people to be able to stand up and be counted when it counts. Conventions committee. Who chooses the committee? Are they self-appointed legislators? What is said that the people in the committees needed to have an understanding process? So does this rule average Joe citizen out because they are somehow unqualified? They say that the committees will limit delegates and that they will not be elected. It was stated every state will choose delegates differently. Who defines what is constitutional and the corrective measure if it goes sideways? And who defines sideways? If it was stated that the legislature would be exempt from the committee, if this is so, why are state senators leading the charge with the convention stating that it is necessary to have knowledge of the procedure? What is to say that the senators leading the charge do not have an agenda to undermine the Constitution or, in its search for glory, of such a historical move? Convention rules? Who will write the rules of the convention? State legislatures that are already in many cases ignorant of the Constitution and the natural rights of man, thinking they have the authority to rule over us, making laws every single year when their job was to preserve the freedom of the people or our unalienable rights, not to tell us what rights we have that we may lose that is only one session away? Protection of the states, the 9th and 10th Amendment are stated to have no teeth or enforcement power. If this is true, how can the other amendment proposed be any different? It is stated that nullification is a defensive move. Is this a problem when it was designed that way? When the offensive moves were documents that were written to limit government? Is an offensive move required when the state can simply swat a fly or rid a rodent with minimal effort? Anyway, it continues to go on and on and on. I think I've fairly well made my case and bullet points on what support and the opposition for the con. I welcome any thoughts on it. I hope this helps. If you guys need copies of the document I have, I compiled it. It's 20 pages. I'd be happy to email it to you. Email me at tom@tommunds.com, TOM@TOMMUNDS.com. Thanks, guys. Love you. Bye.